Hello! Welcome to Silver Tongue Saturdays, sponsored by West Trestle Review, the City of Auburn, and the Auburn Arts Commission. I'm happy you're here. I'm happy you're all wearing masks. Thank you. There is a sign-up sheet for the open mic in the back if you want to read anything. We'd love to have you read. There are bathrooms out the door, past the stairs, and to the right. Let's see. Please turn off your cell phones if you haven't. And I think that's all the news, or all the updates. So let's see. If you haven't discovered West Trestle Review, it is westtrestlreview.com. We are a literary magazine that comes out every 2 months, and we feature women and non-binary poets and fiction writers and artists. You can find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So check us out, and there will be information about next month's reading, which will feature Devorah Major on November 12th. Let's see. But tonight's reading, or this afternoon's reading, is Susan Cohen. And Susan is the author of Democracy of Fire, Throat Singing, and A Different Wakeful Animal, which received the David Martinson Meadowhawk Prize from Red Dragonfly Press. An award-winning science writer and former contributing writer for the Washington Post magazine, before earning an MFA from Pacific University, her poems have appeared in the American Journal of Poetry, Atlanta Review 25th Anniversary Anthology, Pink, Prairie Schooner, Southern Humanities Review, the Southern Review, Valparaiso Poetry Review, and elsewhere. She lives in Berkeley, California. Let's see. And Ellen Bass wrote about her, about Susan's new book, Democracy of Fire. At this historical, political, and ecological moment, with democracy and our earth aflame, could there be a more timely or relevant collection than Susan Cohen's powerful, wise, and deeply humane book of poetry, Democracy of Fire? Here, the many losses we experience both daily and across time, losses both cultural and personal, are mitigated by the act of memory and a faith in, well, the facts of our world and our capacity for intimate reckonings. Once again, Susan Cohen has shown herself to be one of the most compassionate recorders of our complicated times. So here she is, Susan Cohen.
So thank you so much, Tricia, for that introduction and for the invitation. And this is the first time in a very long time that I've actually read in front of people without a screen here, so it's exciting. Thank you for coming. And this is also the first reading from my new book, Democracy of Fire. You're hearing it first here, Auburn. And in honor of all those firsts, and my husband, who is here with me today, I'm going to begin with the first poem in the book, which is written to him. And it was written at the Community of Writers which is a week-long residency in the Sierras. Letter Home. I'm staying among strangers, on the shelf, a history of Finland. I spent 3 days in Helsinki once. When I left, a man saw me off on the train, maybe promised to write, but I couldn't spell his name. I know nothing about the history of Finland, the way I know nothing about the strangers I'm living with here, each a country with allegiances and anthems and alibis. A history of Finland makes me think it is one of many Finnish histories and possibly not definitive. My history of Finland has a chapter titled Autonomy Lost and Independence Gained, Could that be us, love? The Finnish man was a stranger, a blind date the night before. He took the morning off from work to say goodbye and pressed his folded future in my palm. To this day, I have no idea why. Maybe he thought I was a country he could live in. I don't understand what makes people seek each other out. So many possible histories, so many impossible endings. I could be speaking Finnish now, farming fish and naming each of my babies with 3 Ks and too many vowels. But I'm joined with you, sharing the citizenship of long marriage, both of us tending our borders. I've never asked if I turned out to be the person you thought I was, since I'm not the person I thought I was. I could say you and I will always be on a blind date, but I don't want to scare you. When I return home this week, you'll welcome me, I know, my native land, love. Thank you, and you don't need to clap after your turn, but I appreciate it. Tricia's not only generous because she invited me here today, but she has also published me several times in West Trestle Review, along with her co-editor, Annie Stencil. And I'm going to read a poem that was in West Trestle Review. Canine. My friend's husband had always been a man, meager with his words. Within 10 minutes, he parceled out the ones he needed. The last of the golden retrievers they liked to keep, whose names I never could remember, hugged the floor between us. Without thinking, I reached down in the stilted silence to feel the comfort of its coat, and the retriever rose and nosed her head onto my knee. I scratched behind her ears. She snuggled in. I cupped her face and said, pretending to be a dog person, "You, Miss Alita, too." We were looking into the black center of each other's eyes when a sound sirened out of her from somewhere dark and deeper than I ever thought a dog went. It carried on and on, that sound, the same moaning wail that 5 years later still sticks in the back of my throat. I imagine myself grateful. And in the end, dirt swaddled, the stringy roots of dandelions, lady smock, lesser celandine getting to know me. No rowboat, no ferryman, no sickening chop to cross. Afterbirth is membrane. What can afterlife be made of? My family will gather. The bowl I emptied sits ready to hold tangerines or car keys. If it's autumn, wind rouses semaphores of color to compensate for the brisk season of dying. I imagine myself grateful, the way a storm inspires thanks when the roof is finally patched, utility bills paid up, the furnace lit. At last, I'll go back into the dark, content to never be cold again, and take everything with me that was ever really mine. So the book has a series of very short prose poems based on science stories. They're all the same length, and all the titles begin with science news followed by a headline from a science story, and these are scattered throughout the book. Science news. Gene tweak can extend life 500%, but you have to be a worm. If you can learn to love the fist of darkness, let it close around you. No human touch dancing in the rain, light at the end of the tunnel. A simplicity of soil, of foamy loam. Strip down to the basic muscle of survival and let Earth, with all it brings, pass through you. Life extends its linear line. Now, how long is long enough? So, Democracy of Fire is divided into 3 sections, and I think of it in a very, very general way as moving from the personal world to the broader world and eventually to the planet. And so you'll see this is the first poem in the second section, The Drill. I love having a daughter who's grown. We laugh the same staccato laugh. She's walking with me in winter sun past plum trees whose early bloom survived a recent shock of hail. The morning not as warm as it looks. She tugs up her collar, the only person I know whose eardrums ache just like mine in wind. Now she's saying she's been told, don't unlock your classroom door, even if a child bangs terrified and begs you to let her in. She teaches her 5th graders to run, hide, defend, the country's common lesson plan, the latest in education for mortality. She's supposed to run with them, not hang back to shepherd slow ones, not hover over any child body to call out a name without a future. If they're locked down, she's been told to grab the red extinguisher, ready to squelch the fire in his eyes. Then the boys can tackle him. Her children practice their assignments, lower blinds, stack chairs and desks and tables to build a barricade. We have calm voices, but the same angry country in our veins. Now she stops to examine a fig tree in leaf, wondering out loud why it bears buds, since the one next to it stands bare as bone. It seems random how only some will get the chance to open. I didn't expect the sound effects. It's a little off-putting. So, report. Oh, wait till Nick gets
Yeah.
Once I read in a series in Crockett, and a whole group of was in a coffee house, and first they turned on the espresso maker, and then a whole group of bikers biked up on their Harleys. It was a challenge. Okay. Report on the state of the world's children, and this begins, this is based on an annual report that the United Nations puts out about the state of the world's children, which, as you can imagine, is dire. And as of a few years ago, when I wrote this poem, there were more children uprooted and who were refugees than at any time since World War II. And that was before all the catastrophes since. Report on the state of the world's children. They took me to sea in a faulty raft. I couldn't swim, but dead I could float. I came from the wrong tribe. They took me at night over mountains and let go of my hand. I was born at the wrong time. They took me to a place of tents and snow. The heat was fire, and they rationed the flames. Winter entered to sleep with us, also men harsher than winter. I was brave, only my dreams cried out. I came from the wrong village. They took me to a camp with tall fences cholera could vault. I crossed from a wrong country. Alone I wandered a desert. I slept under a cactus for weeks until crows found me. They took me to jail. I watched a green fly who was allowed to come and go. They pronounced my wrong name. I prayed the wrong way. They took my house and gave me rubble, then told me to go home. I sat day after day and made walls from all that I had. My two arms became mother and father, holding each other and hugging my knees. They seem to like to wait for the last stanza. So we just had the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, in which we wish each other a good New Year by saying Lashana Tova. And so I thought I would read this one. It's called Rosh Hashanah with Crow. The crow who made me swerve stood in the street, peeling the dried fruit of a carcass. It could have killed me with its gift for prophecy, foreseeing I'd steer around it into traffic and back seconds before it merged with the blackness of my tires. It would not let go of the string, crow feet adamant and planted like a tyrant's. In my rearview mirror, the bird remained alive and bent in conversation with oblivion, tearing at whatever grease was hardened on the pavement. I drove, glancing backwards at how the crow kept bowing to the spread on its altar. Do I ever abandon myself to any appetite so completely that I forget to listen for the rumble of disaster? This was Rosh Hashanah, a day to be written once again in the book of life with its running addendum of casualties. A day to dip into the honey, but no one in my family was close enough to share it except by text, Lashana Tova, across cities and continents. How I wanted someone near me to celebrate our mutual survival, mine and the crow and the Jews. So this has been quite a few years we've all lived through, hasn't it? And I think we've all tried to find our ways of getting through it. Lots of different types of fires that threaten us. And several things have helped me, my marriage, long marriage, obviously. But another thing is that I began shortly before the pandemic to learn a new language, which happens to be the language of my grandparents, but I didn't hear at home, which is Yiddish, which was the language of European Jews. And through learning this, I also have made some wonderful new friends, one of whom is here today. And I thought in her honor, I would read this cento. And for those of you who are not poets, a cento is a poem made from other people's lines. Typically, it's made from the lines of poems by other poets, often many other poets put together into a new poem. But in this case, all the lines in this poem are Yiddish sayings. And the title is Yiddish Cento. It is always about bread and death. A person can forget everything but eating. Better an egg today than an ox tomorrow. Better one friend with a dish of food than 100 with a sigh. He who has not tasted the bitter does not understand the sweet. All is not butter that comes from a cow. Only in dreams are carrots as big as bears. If you can't endure the bad, you will not live to witness the good. A man should stay alive, if only out of curiosity. He should laugh with the lizards. Laughter is heard farther than weeping. If you are fated to drown, you will drown in a spoonful of water. Man begins in dust and ends in dust. Meanwhile, it's good to drink some vodka. Enjoy life. You can always commit suicide later. If you're going to eat pork, get it all over your beard. So the third section of the book has a lot of nature poems, because nature was another thing that really sustained me, as I suspect it did for a lot of you, to be able to get out into it. Science news. A wild bird leads people to honey. And apparently in Africa there is a type of bird that's called a honeybird, and it can be called, even though it's wild, it can be called and used to find hives. And then once a hive is found, the bird eats the waxy part, and the honey gatherer, the man, gathers the honey. Science news. A wild bird leads people to honey. African hive, hot with bees. A man with a stick calls through his teeth. The bird comes, honey guide. It finds a hive up where a man can't see, and the man lights his stick to shove smoke into air. Tree axed, hive smashed, spilling its frenzy. This is where the sweetness starts. Pond of syrup, meaty wax, open for the bird who learned to be called, the man trained by a bird to share. Science news. Amphibians glow, humans just couldn't see it until now. Someone thought to shine a blue light and discovered brilliance on a tiger salamander's back. Gobs of green. Marbled salamander, Cranwell's horned frog, newt with neon stripes. Their beauty dulled by limitations of the human eye. Possibly such flair serves to unnerve their predators. Silly newts, don't they know how much we cannot see, and yet we stomp everywhere? So I'm just going to read two last poems. In respect to the jellyfish. This begins with an epigraph from a poet. She was a wonderful poet who died on the young side, Lucia Perillo, and she wrote a line, "Because we occupy the wrong animal, don't you too feel it?" In respect to the jellyfish. Even the gelatinous moon jellies, giant jellies, sea gooseberries, and by the wind sailors that litter the beach have lived their animal lives and left a shiny trace that lasts only for a while. Like our own dead, some are still capable of stinging. I step carefully as I look through them, their jellied bodies, melting into gleam on the sand as if they have never known where they end and the world begins. So they dangle in the ocean with a certain uncertainty at the edges, empty in their fullness and filled by their emptiness. Why wouldn't I be content to float day and night, to let my ambivalence take the form of water, shoving me this way and that, to need no protection of bone and leave no fossil, living without architecture, outside of history. So thanks so much for your attention, for your listening. I'm going to finish with one last poem, which is the title poem of the book, and I look forward, I hope, to hearing from some of you after this. This was a poem that was written in the midst of a fire season, which one I've already forgotten. But it was one a few years back when PG&E was trying these preemptive blackouts that could last for as long as a week in some communities, in hopes that they wouldn't start any more fires themselves. And it was written after walking into a dive bar restaurant in the tiny town of Bodega, which is in Sonoma County, just inland from Bodega Bay. And in this bar, there was a sign offering free food. And this is, as I say, the title poem. The title comes from a line in this poem. Fire season with rolling blackouts at the Bodega Bar and Grill. After a week of enforced night, light breaks over the pool table, a clack of cues to crack the silence. All that was perishable is gone into 2 dumpsters out back. New on a whiteboard behind the bar, these offerings: pork belly, salmon, short ribs, butterscotch pudding with or without whipped cream. Also, everything is free for fire survivors, first responders, or anyone who needs it to be. Generosity is a poem tonight, the language of kindness to strangers and gratitude to the volunteers whose red engines screamed from the firehouse next door. No one will argue bumper stickers, wonder who arrived with gun racks or rainbow flags, attack a slogan on someone's sweat-stained cap. Just walking through the warped doorway that never keeps the flies out is a celebration of survival, a free offer, a feast, a toast to the shared citizenship of flesh. Here's to the live and kicking, those with hungers and with thirsts. Waitresses, barkeeps, cooks, paying customers or not, praying customers or not, sooty cows in 2 dry hills whose shit sustains the flies. Here's to the frantic flies, to all of us powerless while flames choose what to burn in this raging democracy of fire. Thank you.
So go ahead and stay up
All
there.
right.
And if you have any questions for Susan, it's time. This is our Q&A time.
Hi. Yeah.
Thank you so much. The poem, if you could remind me the name of it, that had the green fly coming and going.
Oh.
Can you tell me the name?
Report on the state of the world's children.
Okay, so that one feels like it would be impossible to write unless you suffered as that poem did.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, but this.
Could you repeat it?
Oh, sorry. She asked whether this poem, which was about refugee children, it would be impossible to write if you hadn't suffered something similar or felt something similar. You know, this annual report that the United Nations puts out is not just statistics. It's full of anecdotes and actual stories. So, although I didn't know these children personally, I read their stories and not just a statistic about them. And so that's, I guess, a part of the answer. Another part might be that the way I chose to write it's more through the eyes of the children. And I was very gratified. One of the first times I read this when the poem was brand new was at a workshop, and there happened to be a poet who also worked with refugee children. And she said, you know, that's exactly how children talk. They blame themselves. They think they did something wrong and they brought it on themselves. So that was very good to hear, because I worried about the question that you raised, you know, is this accurate to, Annie.
I'll know more when I have the book in my hands, but I feel as though your background in journalism really informs both the subject matter and the approach on a lot of these. How true is that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I still read entirely too much news. That's pretty obvious. And news stories are a jumping off point for a lot of my poems. I do often try and mix. I try to bring in. I also write about my personal life, obviously, but I often try and interweave it or braid it with what's happening in the world because it's just always with us. So in terms of the types of poems, absolutely. I have one or two. I have a few poems that are really pretty direct narratives, and maybe that's more from journalism. I don't know, because a lot of poets write that way, and other poems that are not so much, that are more lyrical. And I brought over also some really good habits from journalism, which is revise, revise, revise. Don't sit there and wait for the muse to talk to you, make it happen, and then be willing to get rid of stuff that doesn't work. That's a sophisticated poetry term, stuff. And I'm still kind of a deadline writer, so I belong to a couple of writing groups because without knowing I have to have something to show people. I can go for weeks just reading way too much news and doing nothing else. Yes?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, could you hear me back there? I hope so. Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. And your response to the last question led into my question, which is quite personal. Do you have a writing ritual which differs from poetry and other kind of writing? Some rituals?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have any rituals.
Could you repeat it?
Oh, I'm sorry. She asked whether I have a writing ritual. And there was more to the question than that.
Different from poetry.
That's different from, well, journalism was a job, so my writing ritual was the editor who was waiting for my story and who probably signed it. Writing poetry, it's really a different set of muscles. It is that. And so I do tend to have to get into the poetry zone, by which, I read a lot of other poets, and some are new to me, and others are poets that I turn back to often, that I've learned from experience, make me want to sit down and write. And then I'm supposed to have a ritual. When I did my MFA with Marvin Bell, he tried to get us all addicted to his ritual, which was to write something every day. In his case, it was usually between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., and to sit down to it and not think you're writing poetry, not think you're writing prose, not thinking you're making a poem, not worrying that you're writing something good, just write. And then, as I was telling Annie on the way up, and then he would say, when something starts to boogie on the page, then you make a poem of it. Well, I do that maybe a couple times a month rather than every day, mostly when I have a deadline coming up, which is how I think of my writing group meetings. And I might do it a few days in a row until something starts to boogie, and then I start to think of it as a poem. Norma, yeah.
I also just want to add my thanks. This was really incredibly enjoyable for me, especially knowing you in another context. But your poem about coming from the wrong city and the wrong place just really spoke to me,
Yeah.
being the child of refugees. And it really connected me deeply with my parents. And I just really appreciate that. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I do have a few other poems in here that are more, I guess another partial answer to that question. My parents were born in America, and I was born in America, but my grandparents were immigrants, like many, probably, of your grandparents. And I do have a few, and the book is dedicated to my grandparents who made the journey. And because I do think about, what if they hadn't? One side of my family came from Ukraine. So I do have some poems that weave that in, and that's part of the weaving the personal into the broader world. Tricia, you're allowed to ask a question.
How long
Well, that particular one I have a very specific memory because I had actually put money down for a workshop with David St. John, and I had nothing to bring. And I saw the sign, and I think that one, the early version anyway, came together pretty fast. But it can be, I can write something down in my supposed daily, my not daily, and maybe I'll go back and look at it, 6, 7 months later and think, why didn't I think I could make a poem from that? And sit down and try and make a poem from it. And they take all different, I'm sure there are poems where you just can't get that one right word or that one, or that last line, and it might even take years. And then there are other poems that just seem to, I don't know that any actually descend, but they feel like they do. The inspiration does, and it happens pretty quickly. But I think part of it too comes from my journalism training. Is like I sit down, there are ways to kind of make it happen, which is mostly by reading other poets, and maybe like the jellyfish poem. I remembered that line from Lucia Perillo, and I don't know why it ended up in reference to jellyfish, but there were all these jellyfish on the beach, and so sometimes just going back and rereading somebody and finding a line that you underlined in somebody else's work and thinking, what would happen if I, just plunked that at the top of a poem, and and then from there it could take you a week or a month or a year or never. I have lots of ones that never go anywhere.
I'm going to double dip here. So you're studying Yiddish. Have you had any aspiration to write poetry in Yiddish?
No, I really feel like I have translated some Yiddish poetry, but I really feel as if writing, and I don't know if the other poets in the room agree with me, but there's so much nuance that I will never have in a second language, and some of the best poems, actually, I think the best poems, and these are clearly not all the best poem, but the real meaning of the poem is in the ambiguity, what lies between the words and what references it calls up to somebody, and I just think that's pretty much impossible to obtain in a language, well, especially when you started learning so late in life, but really in another language that isn't natural to you. Leslie? Yeah.
I wondered if you save ideas. If
Oh, yeah.
an idea comes and you just kind of toss it in a shoebox. And
I'm much more high-tech than the shoebox. I've graduated to a file on my computer. But yeah, that goes into the daily. It might be a headline from a science news story, for example, although I may be done with those now, I don't know. But yes, and I even have attempted over the years, I'll have a poem that nobody else thinks is working, but there's one line I just can't let go of, and I'll put it there, and I'll try poem after poem to plug that line in, and I always get caught in it. Somebody goes, that line there, and they always zero in on but every once in a while I find one and it works. So a lot of poets have basically files of failed poems, and to save that some of the things that they hope they'll find a place for, an image or a line. Yeah, definitely. It's good to keep a notebook, whether it's on your computer or in a notebook. I used to have notebooks, and now I already spend so much of my life on the computer reading news that I just do it on the computer. All right? All right, great. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
This was a really fun.
All right, let's clap for Susan one more time. That was so great. Thank you, Susan.
Question, where can we buy the book?
Oh, right here. I was about to say that. So next up is our open mic, and that will not be streamed or recorded at all. If you didn't get to sign up, you can still sign up. There's still time. And then after the open mic, then Susan will be signing books over here. I'm going to get one for sure. And then, let's see. And then don't forget to come back next month. November 12th is Devorah Major. So I hope you'll be back for that. And our first reader for the open mic is Jess Del Pozo.